In a dramatic last-minute announcement, just before the clock ran out, Washington stopped the blow that was already hanging in the air. The United States announced a 5-day delay in the strike against Iran's power stations and energy infrastructure after what President Donald Trump described as good and productive talks with Tehran. But it must be said right now, the war has not stopped. The fighting has not been halted, and only one threat, an especially heavy one, has been frozen for the time being. This is the new drama now moving to the center of the campaign. Not an American retreat, not regional calm, but a sudden change in pace exactly at the stage when everyone had already prepared to see direct escalation against the energy infrastructure of the Iranian regime. Israel was updated on these talks in advance, and the meaning is clear. While the American move against the power stations has been delayed, the rest of the campaign continues moving forward. The Israeli Air Force continues to operate. The pressure on Tehran is not easing, and American forces continue to build up in this region. In Iran, they rushed to present this announcement as an achievement. The spokesman for the Iranian Parliament's National Security and Foreign Policy Committee, Ibrahim Razai, claimed that the battle continues and that Trump and the United States have failed once again. And at the same time, in Iran, they denied that the talks even took place. They rejected any negotiation and once again made clear that from their point of view, the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. In other words, even after Trump's dramatic announcement, the Iranians do not sound like a side climbing down from the tree. On the contrary, they continue to threaten, continue to deny, and continue trying to project strength at a moment of uncertainty. And this is exactly where the big question of these hours comes in. What is Trump really doing? Is he trying to open a short window for an arrangement that would prevent an immediate strike on the energy infrastructure, or is he simply moving the blow aside in order to first achieve another goal, perhaps around Hormuz, perhaps around the American force buildup, and perhaps around shaping the end conditions of the next stage? What is certain is that the threat has not even been removed. It has only been delayed. It has not disappeared. It has simply been put on hold. And so, before we dive into all the details of this report, we need to understand the new starting point. The arena has not calmed down. It has only become more dangerous, more blurred, and even more dependent on a single decision in the White House. Because now, the question is no longer only whether a major American blow against Iran will come, but when it will return to the table and what will happen here until that moment. US President Donald Trump posted on his Truth Social platform as follows: "Peace through strength, to say the least. Has the final stage of the war arrived? Iran is using the greatest threat, total destruction. Has Iran played its strongest card yet? Iran is announcing that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. Iran answers Trump and threatens to block out the Middle East. Hormuz is open to those who do not harm us," said the Revolutionary Guards. The United States is considering the conquest of the Iranian oil island, Karaj. And at the same time, President Trump gave an ultimatum to the Iranians. Washington is examining the seizure of the strategic island of Karaj, from which about 90% of all of the Iranian oil exports departs. It appears that the American goal is to achieve a strategic change that will prevent Iran from controlling global energy prices. In recent days, it seems that Hezbollah has been trying to challenge Israel without success, while there is no doubt that Iran wants Israel to get busy with Lebanon and ease the intensity of its strikes on Tehran. And we bring you a first publication. Trump confirms that he will come to Jerusalem to receive the Israeli prize. I am Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and we are boots on the ground that bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and everything that is happening in our neighborhood. This is day 23 of the Roaring Lion War, or by its American name, Epic Fury, and it is opening at these very moments as the IDF announced that the Air Force has launched a wave of strikes against the regime targets in Tehran, and Saudi Arabia updated that ballistic missiles were launched from Iran towards Riyadh. And the Iranian news agency reported that the residential building was bombed and collapsed in the city of Urmia in northwestern Iran. The IDF spokesperson announced more weeks of fighting in Iran are expected ahead of us. The United States continues pouring forces into the Middle East. The military is still building its forces up and has not yet reached its maximum pace. It seems that behind the measured pace of the strikes, there is a broad plan to change the regional balance of power quickly. Iran is stepping up the wall of declarations and threats that is so good at, and is setting especially severe red lines. According to the report, if the United States causes damage to the power stations of the Islamic Republic, Iran will immediately activate a response plan. From flooding the market with Iranian oil to threats of destroying electricity infrastructure and seizing export terminals, we will bring you all the options that are available to the President of the United States for reopening the Strait of Hormuz. After President Trump issued an ultimatum to Iran, if the Strait of Hormuz is not opened, the power stations will be attacked. And at the same time, the Americans sent Israel a message saying that freeing the route is expected to take weeks now, and the war will be prolonged accordingly. In Washington, they emphasize that this is a goal of broad strategic change and make clear that it could take time. In the Middle East, it seems that all roads lead to Hormuz. All day we have been talking and reporting about the small strait that is responsible for all the oil coming out of the Middle East. The question is being asked, how will Donald Trump be able to reopen this maritime strait? The Strait of Hormuz is emerging as a decisive battlefield of this war. If Trump's threat is not enough to reopen this strait, the American government has several military and diplomatic options for restoring maritime trade, from mine clearing to an invasion of Karag Island. Each option carries its own risks. Today, we will go into all the military options that are on the table. The commander of the United States Central Command states that Iran is acting out of desperation and is increasing attacks that are deliberately aimed at civilians in Israel and the Gulf. And at the same time, the United States is increasing pressure around the Strait of Hormuz and moving more forces into the area. Iran's foreign minister is playing games and said in response, "We are not the ones blocking Hormuz." Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi referred to the situation around the Strait of Hormuz and acted innocent regarding Iran's actions to close the strait, and even blamed the United States of America. A sharp dispute between the Revolutionary Guards and Iran's internal security forces is creating a deep rupture and loss of trust between the Iranian internal security forces and the Revolutionary Guards, and is immediately pointing to the disintegration of the regime in Tehran. The Israeli Air Force opened in the last few minutes a wave of strikes in Tehran, the capital of Iran. Iranian media reported one fatality following an airstrike in the port of Bandar Abbas and the collapse of a residential building that was attacked in the city of Urmia in the northwest of the country. Iran's nightmare scenario has been revealed. Do the Revolutionary Guards really have an Indian and a deadly card that Iran is preparing for Israel and the United States? According to foreign reports, Iran is holding back missiles, drones, and cruise missiles that have not yet been fully used. In the West, there are also fears of Houthis joining in and of the activation of sleeper cells outside this region. Against the background of this war, Qatar has finally taken steps against Hamas operatives. Sources in the terror organization told Ashraq al-Awsat that Qatar's measures were directed against well-known Hamas figures and came following their support of Iran's attacks. Hezbollah is preparing to take over Beirut in Lebanon. the new step of the terror organization in Lebanon's capital. The IDF spokesperson in Arabic, Colonel Avichai Aderi, sent a warning message to the residents of Lebanon and announced that Israel would attack the Kasmiya Bridge, which is a central part of the coastal road linking southern Lebanon to the center of the country. The Israeli chief of staff approved plans to deepen the maneuver in the north against Hezbollah. The war against Hezbollah has only just begun. Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir held a situation assessment in Northern Command with the General Staff Forum and division commanders and made clear that the IDF is preparing for a prolonged campaign in Lebanon. At the end of the war in Iran, Hezbollah will remain isolated. Muslim anti-Semitism in Europe is celebrating. In London, 4 ambulances belonging to a Jewish rescue organization were set on fire. 3 masked men set fire overnight to the ambulances that belong to the Jewish rescue organization outside a synagogue in the Golders Green neighborhood. The organization's CEO said this was an anti-Semitic attack. There were no casualties, no suspects have yet been arrested. So, let us dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and we are boots on the ground that bring you the whole truth of what's happening in Israel. And this is day 23 of the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And just a second before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth, share our content with as many people as possible. And if this is the first time that you are watching TBN Israel on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, the little bell button, and share with a friend, leave a like, and let us know in the comments where are you watching from, okay? And if you want to see this war through our eyes, behind the scenes, look for Yair Pinto and Mati Shoshani on social media platforms. Our senior Middle East correspondent, Mati Shoshani, is here with us, and we are seeing things heat up. Time is running out for the Iranian regime. What does the United States military planning in the end of the 48-hour ultimatum that Donald Trump gave the IRGC?
I'm sitting here with Jonathan Spire, a Middle East expert and also Director of Research for the Middle East Forum, someone who knows a lot about what's happening in the countries around us. This is a longer interview that's going to air in Heroes, that airs Sundays on TBN. But today we want to really grab the opportunity to talk about what's happening right now. As we sit here, Trump gave an ultimatum, saying to the Iranian government, to the Iranian regime, open the Strait of Hormuz or else. We're going to knock out your grid and all these other threats that came after that. Where is this going to go? Like, what is actually going to happen with the Strait of Hormuz? Will the Iranians respond to that threat, or what are we going to see in the coming days?
First of all, I think it is very unlikely that the Iranians will concede to or capitulate to the threat. This, I think, is something which, with caution, we can predict. The Iranians are not going to say to Trump, you know something, you're absolutely right, we're going to stop managing Strait of Hormuz as the way they're currently doing. What happens if after that, it's difficult to predict because, of course, it depends on a decision that the United States president may indeed himself not yet know what he's going to decide. I certainly can't know. If he does decide to move on and escalate along the lines of the threat he made, then what we're going to witness in the days ahead is a very serious escalation of the dimensions of the current conflict, in which, as has not been the case up until now, the United States will hit hard at the very fabric of life inside Iran, up to and including the power grid, with all the implications that that would have, you know, for hospitals, for daily life in Iran, for schools, for the ability of people to get to have transport and to get food. The implications are enormous if he chooses to act on his threat in the ways available to him physically in terms of American capacities. But it all depends on the decision that he's going to take, and we don't yet know what decision he will take.
Where is all of this taking us? In 2 years, 5 years, you present 2 main scenarios. The Iranian regime is overthrown slowly by the population, or they remain in power and slowly rebuild. What is the Middle East going to look like? Because you've mentioned several big things changing. Israel's position, the Emirates' position in the Middle East. Where are we going?
I think that we are heading both globally and in our region into a period of state-to-state confrontation of a type which maybe we have not witnessed in our lifetimes. In other words, I think that all the indications are we're heading into a period of very great global instability. And I think that the read the Middle Eastern component of that, what will it look like? For as long as the Iranian regime survives, and as I said, I don't think it's necessarily falling anytime very soon, as long as that regime survives, it'll be a contest between the Iranians and their allies, facing against an emergent alliance or emergent group of countries broadly aligned with the United States. That's the big picture. Exactly how the pro-American alliance will work, exactly who will be in it, who will not be in it, exactly how strong the Iranians will be or how not strong they will be, these things we're all going to find out, we can't predict. But that broad picture of, you know, a global state of maybe unprecedented, not unprecedented, but unprecedented in our lifetimes, instability and challenge, and then the Middle Eastern component of that, I think we can discern. I think they are clear, and that's why I think it looks like it's the Iranians and their friends against America and its allies, and it's going to be a contest and a confrontation in the years ahead.
Do we have a choice? I mean, you're painting this really bleak future, or a future of a lot of friction globally. I mean, does Israel or does the United States have an alternative to confronting an evil that is pledged to destroy our way of life? Or are we sort of on this track that can't be avoided of confrontation time and time again?
Well, I think to understand that we need, as usual in a way, to look closely at what the enemy wants and how the enemy thinks. And I think if we do look closely, both at Islamic Republic of Iran itself, but I think also at the broader picture of political Islam and that context from which the Iranian regime emerged, if we look clearly at it, we understand this is a set of ideas which are very serious, which are held deeply and sincerely by many serious people, and which are absolutely intent on transforming the region to our disadvantage, transforming the region in such a way, in fact, that we, as in Israel, for example, will simply not continue to exist as a sovereign Jewish state. So the short answer to your question is we don't have a choice. We've got a very serious group of people who are active, who are busy, who are smart, and who are pledged to our destruction. So we have no choice but to organize properly and intelligently to the best of our ability.
Is there not a positive outcome that's out there? In my mind, if I look at the axis of evil that is the Iranian regime, and they're sort of they are absolutely the engine, both in funding and indoctrination, and also, let's call them on many other logistical levels, behind Hezbollah, behind Hamas to a certain degree. Again, they have other friends. Behind the Houthis to a certain degree. They're a very, very powerful destabilizing force in this region. Isn't there a scenario where they're weakened enough where the Chinese look at this and say, we'd rather step back for a decade or so and wait for the U.S. to be less keen on violence and at least in fighting its enemies, where there is a virtuous cycle instead of a vicious cycle?
Oh yeah, definitely. First of all, I think that in the broadest sense, there's a positive side to the picture, which is that, you know, we're going to win this, I think. Why do I think so? Because I think that our side is the one which can bring prosperity to societies, which can bring chances of development to populations. And at the end of the day, these turn out to be, in the longer term, the most important thing. The other side can only bring poverty. It brings poverty and impoverishment along with a claim to bring honor and dignity, and it's able to sort of fire up crowds, you know, to acts of aggression. That's its very great capacity, and that's not insignificant. But at the end of the day, it cannot bring development and it cannot bring prosperity, and that, to me, is the key variable here. So in the longer term, I think there's good cause for optimism. In terms of what you just asked about, also, yeah, that's why it's so important that the Iranians come out of this current round weakened, because, yes, that I think will cause China and Russia, other potential allies to distance themselves. They won't cut off relations, of course, with Iran. They won't cease to aid it entirely, but they may well say, yeah, it's not worth getting all in behind this regime because this regime can't deliver, and also its days may be relatively short in historical terms. So yeah, we need absolutely to convey that impression to the allies and potential allies of Iran, but that can't be conveyed through language. It must be conveyed through successful action in the period ahead.
Yeah, but I'd imagine, or I envision, there's a psychological element here, which is that the countries of this region specifically, they're looking to this last move, and they want to see how effective, how persistent the U.S. is in projecting its power as the global policeman, specifically in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And countries like Egypt, countries like Syria, and you know the new government of Ashara over there, even Lebanon to a certain degree, and definitely Jordan, they look at this, in my mind at least, they say, we want to side with whoever's going to be able to help uphold our government in the future, whatever's going to be beneficial for us financially in the future, because they all deal with their own internal pressures and financial struggles, etc. I feel like there's a chance of a very substantial positive uptick from all of this. Again, as you say, if it's very clear that the Iranians are weakened as the outcome of this war.
Yeah, that's right. If we can weaken the Iranians significantly in this round, it will have all kinds of beneficial knock-on effects. If the regime can be made to fall now or at some time in the future, as you hinted at a moment ago in one of your questions, then yeah, the benefits will be enormous in the sense that certainly when it comes to direct proxies of Iran, I mean, creations of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, like Lebanese Hezbollah or Iraqi Hezbollah and others, it will be the end for those movements. They'll be reduced to their natural size, which will be vastly smaller, without Iranian assistance. When it comes to organizations like Hamas and the Houthis, it's a bit different. Those are not proxies, they are clients, but they too will be massively weakened by the disappearance of this regime. So yeah, the weaker the regime gets, the better it gets in terms of options for the region. But if the regime can be made to disappear, then of course the strategic benefits would be enormous across the region, very far from Iran itself.
Final question is, how is the Iranian regime holding on? They've been under sanctions for years. Their currency has been devalued to an extreme degree that usually overthrows governments. And the list goes on and on and on, cut off from SWIFT, cut off from all these different things. How are they still in power in this war? How are they paying salaries? How are they feeding the people? How are they getting material goods into the country?
Unfortunately, what has long been the case in Iran is there is a kind of parallel economy to the conventional economy. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps and those close to the regime have long developed their own means through smuggling, through illicit activity, through money laundering, through criminal activity to continue to feed themselves and their families. That's to say, it may well be the case. I'm not in Tehran, so I don't know, but it may well be the case that consumer goods, toothpaste, daily goods are not available to the public in the way that they might want. But the regime doesn't necessarily care about that. When it comes to its own people and its own capacities, it has a parallel economy outside of the conventional lines, which continues to function and will continue to function.
So in other words, they're not days or weeks away from collapsing or imploding from a financial perspective or from a supplies perspective.
They are not, and that's not something we should expect. They are not. They have capacities in place which were long in preparation for precisely this moment, and all the evidence suggests those capacities are continuing, at least for now, and probably will continue to function.
Jonathan, thank you again. It's always fascinating sitting down with you.
Thank you, man.
And guys, if you're watching this, you can watch the full interview on Heroes that airs on Sunday on TBN as part of the long 8-episode series called Heroes of October 7th.
Hey, first of all, good morning and good to see you. We know what President Trump is planning because he told us. He gave the Iranians an ultimatum. He said 48 hours, and at the end of that 48 hours, we're coming for your electrical grid. We're going to knock you guys back, as Americans like to say in wartime, back to the Stone Age. And the threat that was made by President Trump and his war cabinet is very, very clear towards the Iranians. If they don't open up the Strait of Hormuz, they will knock out their grid. The Iranians in response said the most obvious response, well, if you do that to us, we're going to do the same thing to our neighbors. And then they advertised a list, this big map that I posted online yesterday, this big map with all the power stations around the Gulf states, and said, well, if you come for us, we're going to show you, we're going to come for them. So, I mean, the response is quite clear here. Two main target sets. One is the power plants within Iran, and the second one is the oil infrastructure for Iran itself, which is specifically that in Kalg Island. That is what President Trump said. Do we know that that's the end of the list? I'm not sure. I'm sure they have more surprises up their sleeve.
Interesting. Okay, so how many hours are left? Like what, 30 we have left? And what will be like the first area of strike? And is Donald Trump gonna enter the Karag Island as part of this escalation of this picture?
I think that's a really good question. And here really the unknown outnumbers what we do know about this. One, yes, this ends sometime tomorrow. In reality, though, we've seen both Israel and the United States several times when there was a clear deadline presented to the Iranians, strike slightly before the deadline ends when the knowledge was clear that the Iranians weren't going to cooperate with the deadline. I would guess that's going to happen also here. Israel and the United States, by the way, haven't stopped bombing missions in Iran. They've continued every day, every hour even since this ultimatum was placed. And as to the boots on the ground, that's a really good question. We've had two sets of, let's call it press releases by the US government and CENTCOM come out in recent days that said clearly the US armed forces have Marines en route to this region. And by Marines, they don't mean yet more aircraft or yet more carriers. They mean amphibious assault groups. They mean assault carriers. So sort of like these strike forces that are able to land thousands of Marines, plus the aircraft and logistics and command and control that's needed to support that force. We have two waves of those on the way to the Middle East. None of them, by the way, are big enough to occupy anything substantial in Iran, but they would possibly be big enough to have a small move that holds onto the Khalg Island or coastal area in Iran. I don't think that's going to happen tomorrow. That's my guess. It seems a little too risky to me, especially given the level of resistance that we're still seeing from the Iranians and the level of threat to the Straits of Hormuz. There are many other options in that. I mean, you can position quite a few naval vessels in that route. You can escort some of the tankers. You can carry out a severe bombardment of Iranian targets on the coast and within range of the Strait of Hormuz, and all of those would prevent it. And my guess is the opening notes of the end of this ultimatum will be a substantial strike on several big targets in Iran, power stations, IRGC-related facilities, etc. Much of the leadership has already been eliminated, so I don't think we can expect any more of that. Not at least as top-tier leadership, but for sure a substantial bombardment of additional targets in the Strait. There is one more option, Yael, which is this morning you saw some very, let's call it anecdotal, interesting responses from the Iranian regime, where they started backpedaling and saying, wait a minute, we didn't actually close the Strait of Hormuz, we're just threatening to do it. They've done this a lot in the past where there was a clear deadline that was set with a clear threat that was made against them, where instead of just saying, a straight out no or flat out no to the American demands, they'll say, well, we're sort of cooperating and we're sort of playing along. So, and they sort of pose this question mark over the question of whether or not they're actually violating the terms of the ceasefire. So they might say, well, what do you want? We're not stopping anyone from traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. It's your choice not to travel through it. Ignoring in that same sentence the fact that they've made very clear that they would sink any oil tanker that tries to travel through the strait. So there might be something in the middle where they say they're not, but they actually are to try and drag out time and maybe sort of diffuse some of the American response. Ultimately, though, I don't see them opening up the Strait of Hormuz. It's against their interest, and it's sort of I don't want to say it be a death sentence for the government, but it would be an admittance of defeat for the government, and therefore very unlikely for the Iranian regime.
Well, definitely. It looks like the government is already dead, mostly, or the main figures in the government, but for some reason they're still able to carry out more attacks against us. And Mati, I think that the clear message that we received in the last 24 hours was double confirmation from both the IDF and the United States of America that this war is going to take a few more weeks at minimum. What's your estimation about that?
I think it's even longer than that, Yael. I think we're looking at several months. And I'll explain that statement. Even if the war quickly wraps up in Iran, even if the Strait of Hormuz is opened up in a few days, even if the bombardment slowly dies out, it's weeks before we have a substantial ceasefire, at least 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks ago, and we're still at an estimate by the American government and the Israeli armed forces that we're at least several weeks away. Several weeks doesn't mean much, Yael. Several weeks could be 2 weeks, several weeks could be 6 weeks. We know it's many weeks away from ending over there. But even if the Strait of Hormuz opens up, and even if the Iranians come to the table and say we're willing to negotiate, not terms of surrender, but let's call it regime change and the diffusal of their violent acts in the Middle East, that doesn't mean that we're done with Hezbollah, and it doesn't mean that we're done with Hamas. I need to remind people at home, Israel has just started a substantial ground maneuver in Lebanon against Hezbollah targets. Israel has started maneuvering into the Shiite villages in southern Lebanon and clearing out the inhabitants and clearing out the infrastructure that allows them to fire against Jewish communities in direct line of sight fire, so anti-tank missiles, etc. And even if that's over, and that itself is something that takes time, Yael, even when that's over, there's still one more piece that hasn't been solved, Hamas. And all that time, every time that this is happening, we still can expect from someone some kind of threat of rockets or missiles against Israel. even if the Iranians stopped for a day or two or three, stopped firing ballistic missiles on Israel, Hezbollah can still fire. I mean, Hezbollah has continued to fire even though there's substantial IDF presence on the ground, even though the IDF has eliminated hundreds of Hezbollah terrorists this time around, far more, by the way, than happened last summer in the maneuver we had inside Lebanon. The IDF has been very, very, very active, very violent against Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon, as they should be. These people have been firing at our northern communities time and time again. So again, when you stack up the timelines on this, it's weeks for Iran, weeks or months for Hezbollah, and then you still have to resolve the Hamas situation to really say we've diffused this, this ticking time bomb in our region. We're a while away from going back to normal life. And I'd say this on the Home Front Command in Israel. We've already been warned that Passover, that starts the first week of April, Passover is going to be still in a phase of war. So that's another 3 weeks from now. There's even been rumors of a longer time periods than that. So we're many weeks away from ending this, in my estimation.
Well, thank you, Mati. One prayer point for our audience.
Well, since I'm standing here in Jerusalem, pray for the peace of this city. Pray for the peace of its inhabitants. Pray for the supernatural protection of both God and Iron Dome and David's sling and Arrow 3 against Iranian missiles and Hezbollah missiles. All of the above for the protection of the inhabitants of the city and for God's peace to come to this land again.
Amen. Thank you so much, Mati, and we'll see you later on today.
That's right.
And to all of you that are watching us from your houses, we are TBN Israel, and we report multiple times a day. So this is the first time you watch us, go to the subscribe button on YouTube and subscribe. That way you will never forget this channel, TBN Israel, and we are boots on the ground. We report from Israel. I'm Yair Pinto, and with me is Mati Shoshani. Now, it's very important to understand that across Israel, families are running to shelters. Children are hearing sirens instead of school bells. Soldiers are leaving their homes to defend their nation. This is real. This is happening right now, and Israel needs all of us right now. The Bible calls us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And today, that calling is urgent. It requires bold, faithful prayer, and it requires also action. Israel must know that millions of believers around the world are standing with us, not just in words, but in support. And that's why at TBN Israel, we're asking you to step up through our Stand With Israel campaign, because your gifts help us bring the truth from the ground to millions around the world. It brings spiritual encouragement and basically encourage people to pray for the peace of Jerusalem with actual prayer. We want to hear from you. So please send us your prayers to standwithisrael@tbn.tv. Okay? Again, that's standwithisrael@tbn.tv. We read every single one, and we try to respond to all of you. Your prayers strengthen us and keep us going here on the ground. We need to know that you are standing with us. Go right now, if you want to support our work, to tbn.org/standwithisrael or call 800-772-5040. Again, that's tbn.org/standwithisrael or call 800-772-5040. Pray with us, stand with Israel, and give as generously as you can. This is how we can create this content. This is how we can deliver you the most up-to-date information from the ground. That's tbn.org/standwithisrael. Thank you so much. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem, and let's continue. Because this night opened with an unusual launch from Iran towards central Israel. A splitting cluster missile was launched towards the greater Tel Aviv area. It was intercepted, but fragments fell in several locations and caused destruction. After that, alerts were also activated in the south and later in the north as well, while at the same time, the Air Force launched a new wave of strikes in Tehran. The question hanging over day 23 of the Roaring Lion War, or by its American name, Epic Fury, is whether we are now entering a stage in which both sides are no longer only wearing each other down, but are striking the oxygen points of this war: electricity, oil, shipping, command, and perception. because that is the story of this day. Not just another strike and not just another statement. The United States is setting a 48-hour deadline, which is already halfway through, for opening the Strait of Hormuz. Iran answered with direct threats against power stations in Israel, against energy infrastructure in the region, and against anyone hosting American bases. And at the same time, Israel continues striking Tehran itself, while Hezbollah tries to divert the fire towards Lebanon without any real successes. Let us begin on the ground. After the launch towards central Israel, the Israeli Air Force immediately moved to the other side of the equation. In the overnight wave of strikes in Tehran, infrastructure of the Iranian regime was attacked, and reports from inside Iran spoke of a hit in Bandar Abbas, of at least one fatality, and of the collapse of a residential building that was attacked in Urmia, in the northwest of the country. At the same time, there were also reports of a strike in the El Remeliach area in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. In other words, Israel is operating in two arenas almost within the same stretch of time, striking the core area of Iran and not allowing Hezbollah to build itself breathing room in Lebanon. But the strike in Tehran last night did not stand alone. It came as part of a broader move that has already been on its way. According to the IDF spokesperson's statement, dozens of fighter jets operated under the direction of the Intelligence Directorate and struck a series of strategic targets in the Iranian capital. Amongst the targets that were mentioned were a military base used for training soldiers and storing advanced air defensive systems, a central site for production and storage of weapons belonging to the Ministry of Defense, and a dedicated production facility of the Revolutionary Guards Air Force. In addition, an emergency headquarters of the Internal Security Forces and a sensitive headquarters of the Iranian Intelligence Ministry were attacked. In simple words, Israel is not striking only launchers or warehouses. It is going after the production, the command, the control, and the intelligence. And this connects directly to what the commander of the United States Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper, said this morning. Cooper claims that Iran is now operating out of desperation. According to him, in recent weeks, it has carried out more than 300 deliberate attacks against civilian targets all across the Middle East. But at the same time, its overall volume of fire has declined. And at the beginning of the confrontation, there were barrages of dozens of drone and missiles. Now, according to him, it is more a matter of isolated attacks, one or two at a time. This is an important statement because it explains why, on the one hand, there is still a threat, like the one last night in central Israel, but on the other hand, it is clear that the Iranian system is no longer functioning at the pace it had at the beginning of this campaign. Cooper also sharpened another important point. The United States and Israel are not attacking only today's threat, but also the threat of the future. According to him, they are also acting against missile and unmanned aerial vehicle production sites that connects exactly to the Israeli strikes in Tehran. And when you connect those two lines, you see the broader picture of the day. Day number 23. The campaign is no longer focused only on active launches, but on Iran's ability to recover, replenish stockpiles, and also to continue producing firepower over time. And from here, we reach the central point of gravity of this day, the Strait of Hormuz. All roads lead there, or all water paths are reaching there, because Trump set a clear ultimatum. If Iran does not open the Strait of Hormuz to shipping traffic within 48 hours, and that was already yesterday, the United States will strike its power stations. Iran, for its part, did not back down. On the contrary, a spokesman for the Qatam El Anabiya headquarters, the central command of the Iranian armed forces, published a highly unusual list of threats. According to the statement, if Iran's electricity infrastructure is harmed, Tehran will respond immediately in 4 stages. The first stage is the full closure of the Strait of Hormuz until the destroyed power stations are rebuilt. The second stage is aimed directly at Israel, a broad attack on power stations, energy infrastructure, and information and communications infrastructure of the Zionist entity. and the third stage expands the threat to all energy and infrastructure companies in the region in which there are American shareholders. And the fourth stage threatens power stations in regional countries hosting American bases. Later this morning, in slightly different wording, the Revolutionary Guards repeated this message and narrowed it mainly to electricity. If you strike our electricity, we will strike your electricity. Here, it's important to notice the interesting gap in the Iranian messaging. On the one hand, Tehran is threatening that Hormuz will remain closed and that the entire region will pay the price. On the other hand, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi suddenly claims that Hormuz is not closed at all, and that what is preventing movement is the insecurity caused by the war that started by the United States, and this is a double game. Iran wants both to hold the deterrence card and also to try to claim that it is not the one that actually closed the world's most vital shipping route. But opposite that statements stands the Cooper statement of the United States. He said explicitly, physically, the strait is open, but ships are not passing because Iran is firing at them with missiles and drones. In other words, the route may not be blocked by concrete or by mines, but it is blocked by fire. And that is why Washington is already speaking not only about a threat, but about an operation that will last weeks. The message passed to Israel is sharp. Freeing the Strait of Hormuz will not be a short move. The American goal, it was said, is broader than a temporary reopening of shipping. The objective is strategic change, preventing Iran from being able to influence global oil and gas prices. This is very important because it means that in the United States, they are talking not only about ending the crisis, but about changing the rules of the game afterwards. And that also explains why Washington is seriously examining the conquest of the Iranian island of Karaj. This is Iran's oil island, from which about 90% of Iranian oil exports depart, most of it to China. If the United States takes control of it, it will effectively choke Iran's main export artery. And according to one of the reports, this is an option that the Pentagon has rehearsed for years. There is the possibility of using more than 2,000 Marines already sent to the area, or physical forces and paratroopers. But even there, the warning is clear. Such a conquest could be very dangerous, because even after gaining control, American forces would remain exposed to Iranian counterattacks. Karaj is the only one option on the table. The first option is to continue striking from the air at missiles, launchers, drones, and batteries along Iran's southern coast. And according to one assessment, Iran's capability to launch anti-ship missiles has already been reduced by 90%, but it is still filled with munitions. And a second option is clearing naval mines. If they have indeed been laid in the strait, that is a process that could take weeks, put troops at risk, and also disrupt the shipping lanes, even if only one mine remains. A third option is a massive strike on the Iranian Navy and the fast boat fleet of the Revolutionary Guards. It has already been reported that more than 120 vessels have been destroyed or damaged, but Iran still has hundreds of fast boats, some of them hiding in civilian ports. And a fourth option is close escort of tankers by American warships, a move that sounds simple on paper, but in practice it requires destroyers, aircraft, helicopters, a lot of time, and a great amount of resources. And before we continue forward, there is a short point here worth pausing on. If you like what we're doing here, and if you think it matters, help us spread the truth. Yeah, you can do that by subscribing to TBN Israel on YouTube channel. You can do that by leaving a comment, hitting the like button, sharing this video with a friend. Let us know where you're watching. And now, let's return to the picture on the ground, because this whole discussion about Hormuz is not only militarily, it is also an economic and a political war. The Trump administration has already taken an unusual step and temporarily eased for 30 days the sanctions on the purchase of Iranian oil at sea. The goal is to stop the surge in the energy prices. And according to the assessment, this move could inject about 140 million barrels of oil into the global market. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent explained that the move is intended to stabilize the prices that rose sharply, especially because of concern about harm to consumers and to the American economy ahead of the midterm elections. In other words, the White House is simultaneously operating two seemingly opposite levels. On the one hand, threatening Iran's power stations, and on the other hand, releasing Iranian oil to the markets in order to cool prices. This is not confusion. It is a double strategy. Apply military pressure while buying economic time. But the state of the energy market is already severe. The head of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, says that the current crisis is worse than both of the oil crises of the 1970s combined. According to him, at least 40 energy facilities in the Middle East have been seriously damaged, and no country is immune to the consequences. He's also speaking about the possibility of another release of emergency reserves in Asia and in Europe. That is another indication that this campaign is no longer only a regional war. It is becoming a global energy crisis. And in the middle of all of this, Trump is also continuing the wage a war of perception. He wrote on his network, "Peace through strength, to say the least." And in addition, in other conversation, he said that soon there will be the complete destruction of Iran. This is very harsh language, and it is intended for Tehran, for the markets, and for his political base in the United States. But it is important to notice that alongside the declarations, he maintained ambiguity on the question of whether Iranian oil infrastructure itself is already in the crosshairs and whether the United States will actually take control of oil facilities to make Iran pay for this war. In other words, the threat is severe, but some of the next cards are still being kept face down. Inside Iran itself, Day 23 is also exposing a dangerous internal fault line. Reports speak of a sharp dispute between the Revolutionary Guards and the internal security forces. Each side is accusing the other of dysfunction and operational failure. The police feel that they are cannon fodder, and they abandoned their positions in the field, and that their casualty rate is dozens of times higher than the besieged forces. This fracture sharpened especially around the events of the Festival of Light, when, according to the reports, Israel operated drones that struck police forces in the streets with perception. While the Revolutionary Guard's defense systems did not assist at all. So the result is that, according to the report, there is severe damage to the morale and a wave of refusals to obey orders and loosening control on the Iranian streets. And if this is true, the regime is now facing not only external pressure, but also a severe crisis of trust between its own enforcement arms. And from the Iranian side, there is also an attempt to create mystery around a last card. Foreign reports speak of Tehran still holding missiles, drones, and cruise missiles that have not yet been fully used. And in the West, there are also fears of the Houthis joining in and of sleeper cells being activated outside this region. In other words, the fear is that Iran is still preserving capabilities for an expanded confrontation. But here too, it is important to be precise. As of now, what we are seeing in practice is actually a decline in the pace of direct fire and an increase in the role of threats, in perception maneuvers, and in the attempt to spread the arena. And that brings us to Lebanon. In recent days, the Hezbollah terrorist organization has been trying to challenge Israel, but it is not succeeding in changing the center of gravity of the campaign. And according to one report, the organization carried out more than 150 attacks into Israeli territory, most of them towards the frontline communities, Kiryat Shmona, Shlomi, Ma'alot, Tzfat, and Nahariya. The goal is clear: to create sustained pressure on the Israeli home front, wear down the population, and perhaps bring about abandonment. But at the same time, Israel is trying to strike Hezbollah's movement and transfer infrastructure. Thus, the IDF spokesperson in Arabic, Colonel Avichai Aderi, publicly warned the residents of Lebanon about an attack on the Kasmia Bridge, a central part of the coastal road connecting southern Lebanon to the center of the country. In the announcement, he called on residents to move north of the Zariani River and avoid movement southward. Afterward, the bridge was struck. The meaning of this move is clear. Israel is trying to hit Hezbollah's logistical oxygen pipelines, not only a weapons warehouse or a position, but roads, bridges, and the ability to move reinforcements and weapons. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun hurried to claim that this is part of a suspicious plan to establish a buffer zone and that the strikes are a prelude to a ground invasion. But from the Israeli side, the message is different. Whoever uses civilian transports and routes to move weapons marks them as a target. So this also connects to another process that is exposed today in Beirut. Hezbollah has begun renting apartments and offices under false names for operatives, officers, and security personnel. This is including the presence of the Revolutionary Guards personnel. And according to the reports, the organization even disables security cameras in buildings to prevent identification. Israeli strikes expose this method, and it teaches about the depth of the Israeli intelligence pressure on Hezbollah's leadership. But it also has another side. Lebanese residents are saying openly that these people are endangering everyone who lives near them to the point of mortal danger. Some are already warning of a new May 7 in Beirut, like Hezbollah's violent takeover move in 2008. In other words, the pressure on Hezbollah is no longer only military. It is also civilian, social, and internal within Lebanon. The Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, said yesterday that, in simple terms, the war against Hezbollah has only just begun. He approved plans to deepen the maneuver in the north, said that the Iranian arena is the main effort, but that the north is an additional central arena, and made clear that at the end of the campaign in Iran, Hezbollah will remain alone and isolated. This is a clear Israeli line, not to allow Hezbollah to save Iran by opening a secondary front that would swallow Israeli attention. The Palestinian regional arena also moved today. Qatar, which is unusually very cautious towards Hamas, took steps against several figures in the organization. And according to the report, the steps were taken following the support that those senior figures gave to the Iranian attacks. It was not published exactly what was done, but the very move is significant. In addition, it was reported that Hamas is considering almost definitively postponing or canceling the elections for head of the political bureau in light of the regional change and the paralysis that has been created. Here too, the message is clear. The war against Iran is moving pieces inside other terrorist organizations as well. Qatar is signaling that it is not prepared to automatically carry out the implications of a pro-Iranian line, and Hamas is once again entering a state of internal delay and freeze. And there is also a broader arena, further away, but no less important. In London, 3 masked men set fire overnight to 4 ambulances belonging to a Jewish rescue organization outside a synagogue in Golders Green. There were no casualties, but this was a clear anti-Semitic attack. 56 calls reached the fire services, 6 fire engines, and also around 40 firefighters operated at that scene. Some of the tanks on the ambulances exploded. Windows in nearby buildings were shattered, and the police are speaking openly of an anti-Semitic hate crime. This is not the main arena of fighting, but it is part of the same wave. The war in the Middle East continues to bring violence against Jews out into the open in Europe as well. And in the middle of all of this, another political symbolic component also enters. Trump confirmed that he intends to come to Jerusalem in April to receive the Israel Prize. Beyond the symbolic value, this announcement draws a clear political line. Trump is not only involved in the arena, not only issuing an ultimatum, and not only directing American force in the Gulf, he's also seeking to publicly anchor himself inside the Israeli story of this war. At the same time, he continues to lavish praise on Netanyahu and attack President Herzog. This is no longer only about security. This is a political war, and therefore, if we connect all the materials of the day, from actual threats to attacks to the political side of this war, the picture looks like this. Iran is still firing, but at lower pace and in more unusual forms, like the cluster missile that struck Israel tonight. Israel continues to deepen the strikes in the heart of Tehran against production, intelligence, and command. The United States is not approaching restraint. It is building a longer move around Hormuz, with a deadline, a threat against power stations, and a real possibility of a ground operation on Karag. Iran is trying to deter through electricity, oil, and threats of regional apocalypse. Hezbollah is firing, but not succeeding in shifting the center of efforts. Qatar is moving its line towards Hamas, and alongside all of this, the energy crisis and anti-Semitism around the world are showing that this war is already spilling far beyond the line between Israel and Iran. This is no longer only a test of firepower, but a test of who will break first around the critical junctions of electricity, oil, shipping, and regime survival. And if that is the situation just before Trump's deadline expires, what will come first? A forced opening of Hormuz or an Iranian counterblow that tries to set the entire region on fire at once? So I don't have all the answers. When I don't have the answers, especially when it means life or death and situations of war, I trust in God. So I recommend all of you to do the same. Pray to Him with whatever questions you have, whatever struggles you're going through in your life. It can be related to this war, can be general personal stuff. God is listening. I learned in this war that we cannot trust on anybody but Him. And that's the best thing that we can do. And I learned that He's a faithful God. He cares. He performs biblical level miracles today. And He gives wisdom to those who seek it. So let's ask for wisdom for our leaders that are involved in making very tough decisions. Let's pray for all the soldiers that are defending all of us. Let's keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.